In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we read, "There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim from the hills of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah." And the rest of the verse goes on to describe his lineage. "And he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the second Peninnah." Now, obviously Elkanah was practicing polygamy here, which was contrary to the original law and a transgression of the original institution of marriage. When Jesus spoke of issues relating to marriage and divorce, he had said, "For this cause a man shall leave father and mother, and shall cling to his wife, and the two of them shall be one flesh." And then 3 verses later, Jesus said, "Because of your hard-heartedness, Moses allowed you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so." But polygamy seems to have been prevalent among the Hebrews in the days of Hannah and Elkanah, and I think part of the reason for that could have been that there was no king in Israel. In the last chapter of Judges, we read, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes." And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, children in ancient Israel were more than important. They were symbols of fulfillment. A Hebrew man's posterity was bound up in his having a son to perpetuate his name. And his wife's inability to conceive and bear him a son was actually regarded as almost a curse from God. And often in those days, though it was never ever sanctioned by God, a man whose wife was infertile would take a second wife who could bear children for him. Remember the story of Abraham and Sarah? And Sarah was barren at first, and so Abraham took Hagar, Sarah's handmaid, had a child by Hagar. And then later on, like father, like son, Jacob, one of Abraham's sons, he took two wives. They were sisters, Rachel and Leah. And both of them were also barren, and he took each of their handmaids. There was Bilhah and Zilpah, and had children by them. And so this whole thing of the importance of children and what was going on in those days with no king explains, I think, a little bit of why Elkanah had two wives. He had married Hannah first. Turned out she was barren. He loved her, but he wanted to have children, so then he married Peninnah. And this man went up out of the city, from year to year to worship and to sacrifice to Jehovah of hosts in Shiloh. This was a city about 16 miles from where they lived. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of Jehovah, were there. The law required all Hebrew males to appear at the tabernacle, or the temple of the Lord, for 3 major festivals each year. The first was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and this feast was to commemorate when the children of Israel were freed out of their bondage from Egypt. And the second feast was the Feast of Harvest, and this was for the first fruits of their labor. And then the third feast was the Feast of Ingathering. At the end of the year, when they were gathering their crops in, they would celebrate that. And a time came that Elkanah offered, and he gave portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters. Now the offerer received back the greater portion of these peace offerings, which he and his family or their friends were accustomed to eat at this social feast before the Lord. But to Hannah he gave one double portion, for he loved Hannah. But Jehovah had shut up her womb, and her foe also provoked her grievously in order to make her tremble, because Jehovah had shut up her womb. And as he, that's Elkanah, did so year by year, when she went up to the house of Jehovah, so she, Peninnah, provoked her, Hannah. And Hannah wept and did not eat. So every year, in Hannah's case, her childlessness was a double burden. Her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her, and year after year, when Elkanah and all his family went to Shiloh to worship at the tabernacle there, Hannah met her family and her friends still childless. And I have no doubt in my mind that Peninnah was quick to remind everyone that Hannah was still without child. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, "Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" And at first it would seem that maybe Elkanah's being a little selfish and jealous or self-centered, but I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think he was being insensitive in any way. I think he really loved Hannah, and he was probably as upset about this whole thing as she was. And as such, he tried his best to console her, to support her, and to let her know that he loved her by giving her more and by talking with her. And Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk, and Eli the priest sat on the seat by the side post of the temple of Jehovah, and she was in bitterness of soul, prayed to Jehovah, and wept sorely, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was totally depressed, down, dejected, discouraged, hopeless, helpless. She just was about as low as one could get. And then she vowed a vow and said, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look upon the affliction of your handmaid and remember me, and not forget your handmaid, but will give to your handmaid a man-child, a little boy, then I'll give him to Jehovah all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head." And at first glance, it seems like, okay, here's how you get prayer answered. Make a deal. Let's make a deal. Let's negotiate with the Lord. Lord, if you do this, I'll do that. But I don't think that's really what's going on here. I think this was a real turning point in Hannah's heart. In prayer, she began to reorder her priorities. She made a commitment to dedicate the son that she prayed to the Lord for, and she no longer wanted a child just for herself. She began to look beyond her own needs and to envision the good that would come about from meeting her needs and the good that it might do for others. And it happened as she continued praying before Jehovah, Eli noticed her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips moved. She was not saying words out loud. She was just praying in her heart, but moving her lips. But her voice was not heard, and Eli thought she had become drunk. Today, if someone begins to pray out loud in a public place, we think they're a little wacko or something. The proper way to do it is to bow your head and close your eyes and pray silently. But in those days, they did pray out loud. And Eli said to her, "How long will you be drunken? Put away your wine from you." And Hannah answered, "No, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have neither drunk wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before Jehovah. Do not count your handmaid for a daughter of wickedness, for out of the abundance of my meditation and grief I have spoken until now." And I think the operative phrase here is until now. Hannah was trying to say, first of all, nope, I'm not drunk, absolutely not. And secondly, her prayer and her attitude was drastically different and no longer out of an abundance of her meditation and grief. And after she said that, Eli got it. He understood what she was saying. And he says, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant to you your petition that you have asked of him." And she said, "Let your handmaid find grace in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. What a difference hope can make. See, Hannah had the knowledge of God, of who he is, what he's like, his promises, what he was thinking, and that same knowledge is available to us through this story, through the Word. And they rose up early in the morning, worshipped before Jehovah, and returned and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and Jehovah remembered her. They got home and had husband-wife intimate relationships, and God remembered her. So hang in there, Hannah. God remembered you. Now, for me, when I studied this story, I saw something new, kind of a new revelation for me. I saw someone in pain, and I saw someone who loved that person, trying to help them, console them, and encourage them. I've been on both sides of that coin. I've been hurting, and people have tried to help me, and I've seen people hurting, and I've tried to help them. And what I got this time out of this was there are times when pain can be so deep, so strong, so devastating, that even though I, with the right motive, try to console and help, it just won't be enough. And I can do one of two things. I can feel guilty. Sometimes I can even feel irritated that, why don't you snap out of this? or why don't you listen to me? I love you. But I need to do neither of those. Those are the times when I realize that it's God who can reach down and comfort a heart, and God who can make those promises and fulfill them and bring people back to himself. And those are the times when I need and you need to pray and ask God to open the eyes of someone's understanding. So hang in there. God does remember.